I read this piece this morning and thought, wow, this is so much on the point, right? The way things are going politically here in this province right now. Look, there have always been, polar opposite views, if you will, right? And I think it's being accentuated more now than it has in a while, and that's because Paul St. Pierre Plamondon, the leader of the PQ, who has, let's be honest, has been surging in the polls. He's doing better now than he has, I think, in recent history anyway. But he is not the same kind of leader as someone like a René Lévesque was. And I think that's sort of what this point gets to in André Pratte's piece. So André Pratte is on the line. He's a communications consultant, former Canadian senator as well. Monsieur Pratte, thanks so much for the time this afternoon. This all stems, I guess, from the discussion last week, or first the announcement by Marc Miller, who's a new minister now, taking over from Stephen Guilbeault, which puts culture in Quebec sort of in his bailiwick. And then the reaction from Paul St. Pierre Plamondon. Now, of course, at the time, to be fair, the Premier, François Legault, wasn't real thrilled about this either. He had some rather harsh words, typically not the kind of things you hear, talking about a federal minister. But then Paul St. Pierre Plamondon took it to a whole other level, right? Calling out not Marc Miller so much, but the Quebec cultural community, and you thought perhaps that was, first of all, well over the top, and he's, to some degree, apologized for that.
Well, yes, hello, Aaron. Yes, well, I mean, St. Pierre Plamondon said... He talked about, leaders of the cultural groups in Quebec, and he denounced what he called their intellectual emptiness and groveling. And then he said later, a significant portion of the cultural community seems to be disloyal to Quebec culture. Those are very strong words, especially for milieu, the cultural groups that have been usually very friendly with the Parti Québécois. And I was struck by those words, and those reminded me of a brief encounter I had with Mr. St. Pierre Plamondon a couple of weeks ago, where I went to shake his hand. It was a backstage at a television studio, and I went to shake his hand, and he very reluctantly accepted to shake my hand, but he did not reply when I asked him, how things were going, and he did not look at me, and I could sense the hostility, the coldness and the hostility that he felt towards me, because I happen not to agree with his views on Quebec's political future. And so I put the two incidents together, and to me it's certainly an indication that at least for some politicians, adversaries are more than adversaries; they're really enemies. And I think that's something we see in other countries, especially in the U.S., and we don't want that to happen in Quebec or in the rest of Canada, for that matter.
Can you ever remember, Monsieur Pratte, a time like that in Quebec? I mean, I mentioned René Lévesque off the top. If we go back to the 1970s, even then, and he's still, of course, now, his legacy is that he respected people even on the other side. When did it become so different?
I'm not sure when that changed. I know, and I recall in the piece that was published in the Gazette this morning, that when I was in the Senate, I sat in the Senate for 3 years and a half, and when I was in the Senate, the opposition was the conservative group, and amongst conservative senators, there were really two very easily identified groups. There was one that was composed of senators appointed by Mr. Mulroney, and the other senators appointed by Stephen Harper. And there was a real difference between the two of them, and especially the senators. With the senators appointed by Mr. Mulroney, we had our differences, but at some point, you need to compromise, and you need to find a pathway for a solution if you want things to move forward. It was possible to do that with senators appointed by Mr. Mulroney, so progressive conservative senators. It was much more difficult with the other group. And they, some of them even refused to talk to senators that were appointed by Mr. Trudeau, Justin Trudeau. Mm-hmm. So I don't know when it started, but I guess maybe we're simply contaminated by what happens in other countries, and especially the United States. But we're a much smaller society, and especially Quebec. We're sort of a family, really. Everyone knows each other, and it's for a small society, like a relatively small society like ours, if we go down that road, it's going to be very difficult to have to live together and share experiences. You mentioned when René Lévesque was alive, and I mean I can remember certainly there were very, very difficult debates on Quebec's future. But at the same time, personal relationships between Robert Bourassa and René Lévesque have always been very civil. They respected each other, and they could talk to each other. And even between Mr. Lévesque and Trudeau Sr., they had a personal relationship that was okay, because they accepted that you could have different views and still be maybe not friends, but at least be civil towards each other.
I wish we had more time. I wonder if those days are done. I spoke to Paul St. Pierre Plamondon a couple of weeks ago. We had him on a podcast, and at one point he said, you know what, or he gave the impression that you can't be, and I think his words were, you can't be a true Quebecer, right, unless you believe that the future of this province lies in separation. And I thought, there we go. There's a situation where this is your idea, and anybody else who doesn't think like you is not just wrong, they're the enemy.
Well, I think that's what came out from what he said about the leaders of the cultural organizations, right? He said they were disloyal to French in Quebec and Quebec culture because they entertained some kind of professional relationship with the federal minister. I mean, that's a very narrow way of seeing political debate. I mean, it means that if you don't agree, you're disloyal to Quebec, or in the case of English-speaking Quebecers, that you're not really Quebecers because you don't agree with separation. I mean, we're all Quebecers, right? Anyone who lives in Quebec, in my view, anyone who lives in Quebec, and that was certainly René Lévesque's view, is a Quebecer, and that's it. That you don't need to say anything more. We're all Quebecers. Yeah. We're all in it together.
Mr. Pratte, always appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Canadian women are looking for more out of themselves, their businesses, their elected leaders, and the world around them.
And that's why we're thrilled to introduce the Honest Talk podcast.
I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark. And in this podcast, we interview Canada's most inspiring women.
Entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, politicians, and newsmakers, all at different stages of their journey.
So if you're looking to connect, then we hope you'll join us.
Listen to the Honest Talk podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcasts.